just want to make sure we stay punctual because I know people have busy schedules. So hi everyone, I'm Jess Souter from Leeds Trinity University. Welcome to the Leeds Trinity Business Network. At our last network, we asked Sarah Hawthorne, who's here today, what did she think all businesses should can include in their communications in the future, and what's going to be the thing that businesses need to be mindful of and make sure their customers and clients know they are doing something about. And she said climate emergency and sustainability, and it's really apt because we'd already planned this. The theme for this session today is climate emergency. So I'm really excited to be able to run this for you. So today we have two experts. We have Polly Cook from Leeds City Council, who is Chief Officer of Sustainable Energy and Air Quality. And Polly's going to talk to us about the council's ambitious targets, what the plan is for the city, what the roadmap looks like, and how you as a business can support with that plan, what you can do. And then we have Kirsty Dodd, who set up her own business as sustainability being the core business model, called the Refilling Station. And Kirsty's going to talk us through her business, why and how she set that up, and what she's doing, and offering some tips as well. So hopefully it'll be really interesting from a personal human point of view. A lot of you live in Leeds City region, so you'll be interested in what's happening and what the plans are for the city, but also as business owners, business representatives, to see what you can take back and include in your strategies and in your communications going forward. So hopefully that's we'll take questions from Polly after Polly's presentation, and then we'll move to Kirsty. So hopefully it'll be interactive and you get to ask lots of questions. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to you, please, Polly. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jess. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully that will work. We had a practice run, so can people see that before I start?
Yes, we can see that.
Brilliant. So Jess has already introduced me even, so I won't go through that. But I mean, basically my remit is that I head up the climate emergency response for both the city and the council. So just to kind of set the context, it was back in March 2019 that the council voted to declare a climate emergency. And really, I suppose what inspired that was, one, what was happening internationally. So the IPCC was saying that basically the previous target of trying to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade was no longer sufficient, and actually the consequences of that would be too catastrophic. And so we needed to be more ambitious, and we needed to stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade to minimise the worst effects of climate change globally. But also we just saw an upswell of youth in the city who were doing the youth strikes, who were really actively campaigning to make sure that climate emergency was at the heart and centre of local government. And ultimately the council represents the people of the city. And so it was only right that they responded to that kind of feeling across the city. And so the target that the council set is a scientific target. So it's basically that the city will become carbon neutral by 2030. And that as a council, we will halve our organisation's emissions by 2025. And what's really interesting about that target is actually the council cannot do it on its own. We can't force individual homeowners to change what they're doing, or businesses. We only have limited powers. There are elements of the system that we can control and manage, and obviously our own estate is a prime example. But there are bits that are outside of our power. So a key part of that was about starting the climate conversation. So in 2019, we did a whole year around the Big Leaf climate conversation. And quite often when I go to events and present, I pretty much know everyone in the room, and there is a real core of environmental activists within the city that I know very well. And the big challenge is, how do you reach out beyond that grouping? Because they already know what needs to happen and the risks. And so what we did, we went out to events. So rather than have an event that was around climate, we would go to events that were aimed about entertaining children, or Pride event, or the carnival, whatever it was, to try and talk to a much wider audience, and also to try and understand their views. And one of the questions that was particularly relevant for the audience today was that 97% of the people that were asked thought that businesses and organisations have a responsibility to reduce their carbon emissions and help others make sustainable choices. So I think it's interesting, you know, that quite often if we ask questions like that, people come back and say it's government, it's, you know, it's the council, which we're also high up there. But people do think businesses do need to take a lead in this agenda. So in Leeds, we're really lucky. We have so much fantastic kind of academic knowledge and potential, and play a really central role in some of the things that are happening nationally with the kind of National Climate Commission. We have people who work at the university that advise on that. But we also have our own Leeds Climate Commission that was set up by Professor Andy Gorson. And what they help the city to do is actually to make sure what we're doing is based on science, and that the facts and the figures stack up, and they act as that kind of critical friend almost to the council and the city. The Leeds Climate Commission is formed of businesses, public sector, private sector, and so it's trying to represent the views of the city and trying to get kind of a path and a way forward through this agenda, which is incredibly challenging. So just to give you an idea of what happens, so at an international level, there is a budget for how much carbon the planet can use up to 2050 and still stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade. What then happens is that's cascaded down to a country level, and then that's cascaded down to a city level. So as a city, we have a budget of 31 million tonnes of carbon that we can emit between now and 2050 to stay within our budget. What's really frightening about that figure is we, at this moment in time, emit 4 million tonnes of carbon a year as a city. So within 9 years, we will have used up our budget to 2050, and then actually we are kind of beyond the point of no return. We're beyond the path of 1.5 degrees centigrade. So it's just trying to sort of stress the urgency. You know, we keep talking about it's a climate emergency, but I think starting to see the figures and the speed that change is required to actually keep those consequences to a minimum is really important. And just to give you, again, a feeling of what we have achieved. So from 2000 to now, we've reduced our emissions by 40%. However, in the next 5 years, we need to increase that to 70%. And so the kind of pace of change has just got to be kind of beyond anything we will have ever seen before as a country, which is why you're starting to see some of the national policies coming in. So, for example, the kind of the change in policy of diesel and petrol cars to 2030. You know, and you might argue that's still not soon enough when you start to look at those figures. Just to give you a feel for what's actually happening within the city. So when we talk about something called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, so that's where we're more kind of where we're directly emitting things. So when we're burning gas or putting fuel in our cars or connecting to the electricity grid, you kind of work on the basis that about a third of those emissions in the city are from transport and travel, about a third are from our kind of domestic property, and about a third are from businesses. So that just gives you a sort of feel for the split. If you start talking about Scope 3 emissions, that's when we're talking about things like what we eat, what we wear. And again, there's still benefit in working on those emissions, because obviously anything we can do to reduce is fundamental. And things like food, you hear figures like 20% of emissions are from food, but they're not always against the same sort of basis. When people talk about a third for transport, housing and buildings, that's when they're looking at just Scope 1 and Scope 2. When they start to talk about food, they're looking at overall emissions. So quite often people get quite confused with the different figures that are quoted, but frequently it's because different baselines are used. So in terms of transport and travel, we are currently consulting on a new transport strategy for the city. And at the heart of it is the principle that Leeds becomes a city where you don't need to use a car, which for lots of people, I think, will feel quite a long way away from where we are now. And quite often in Leeds, if you want to do journeys from where you live into the city centre, for a lot of people, actually, that's quite achievable. But when you start to go across city, you know, for me, going from Horsforth to Pudsey, for example, would be quite tricky. It would be kind of a couple of buses. And it's looking how we identify those journeys, how we also kind of really promote local living, And that's out for consultation at the moment. So I'd really encourage people to get involved in that and have their say. There's already been 270 million in transforming travel primarily around sort of the bus fleet, bus lanes, and also looking at some of the active travel, the cycling, the walking, and trying to promote that. And the ambition within the strategy is actually that buses do become a much more significant part of our transport mix. And that actually they become, more reliable, more frequent, run over longer hours, and actually that makes them more attractive in comparison to a car. In terms of sort of energy, we have kind of some real, I suppose, flagship projects. So that third photo down on the right is our RERF, which is our kind of energy from waste plant. So all the black bin waste from the city goes there and is burnt, and actually as it's burnt, it creates electricity. But also what we've done is all the waste heat that comes from that plant is now being piped around the city in a project appropriately called Leeds Pipes. And actually we're heating just under 2,000 homes, our civic buildings, Town Hall, Civic Hall, the Leeds Playhouse. We've got other buildings that are lined up to connect, such as the College of Music, some of the other public sector buildings in the city. And so it's just trying to make the most of the resources we have and reducing the carbon footprint. We also are investing, so yesterday there was a big press announcement about the fact we're investing about 100 million in retrofitting the social housing across the city. And part of that is obviously it brings that housing up, makes it more affordable for people to be able to heat, obviously reduces the carbon footprint, but also it starts to showcase actually what is achievable across all different types of housing stock. And also starts to build the skill base and the jobs within the city in those new greener skills. It would be remiss of me not to talk about biodiversity today, because today is World Wildlife Day, and you might see on social media that the typical owl logo of the council has actually lost the owl today in recognition of the loss of biodiversity across the world. And actually, you can't talk about climate emergency and not think about the biodiversity side, because we could solve the climate emergency and actually still be left with some really fundamental problems if we don't start to reverse some of the biodiversity loss, even from a selfish point of view in terms of the kind of pollinators and things in our own food production. And I always like to think about, as a kid, when I used to be on the motorway driving, you'd get to your destination, your windscreen would be covered in insects. Now, if you go out, that doesn't happen. And it's quite frightening that I think in probably 30 years, I can visually see the difference in what's happened. And so we're doing a lot of work to try and reverse that. So some is around sort of tree planting, but also looking at actually how do we encourage people to use their own gardens differently, and looking at kind of the canopy that's underneath trees as well, not just the tree planting. Within our own structures, within every decision now, kind of the climate emergency is in there as part of that decision-making process. We've set up cross-party advisory committees, and we're just in the process of developing an investment prospectus to look at how we help to kind of plug that funding gap for all the things that need to be done to get us to net zero. So in terms of businesses and just some kind of high level things that are happening and that can be supported at a city level, one of the first things I think for anybody when you start to look at carbon and your own emissions is to actually understand your baseline and understand where you are and what you're trying to achieve. And the easiest things to start to measure are obviously emissions from buildings, because how much gas you're buying, how much electricity you're buying. There's standard conversion factors available which get updated every year by the government. So that's an easy starting place. Obviously, fuel from vehicles, again, is another kind of easier place to start. It starts to get more tricky when you start to look at the kind of beyond scope 1 and 2, and you start to look at what you're consuming as an organisation. If you're involved in construction, you're starting to look at like the embedded carbon within products. But all of that is starting to become more commonplace, and there's more toolkits and things starting to happen. But I'd encourage businesses to start, I suppose, with the simpler parts if they haven't done that already, and then obviously start to look at the kind of wider agenda. So in terms of some of the things that we've done more locally to support businesses, we currently are operating an electric van trial scheme. So when I first started getting involved more in vehicles, one of the things that people always talk about is range anxiety. I can't change to electric because of this. And so what we've done is allowed organisations to try an electric vehicle for free. So all they're paying for is the insurance in that during that period, and then there's no obligation. They can hand it back if it doesn't work for their business. But actually what people are finding is that it does work for their business, and once you've driven an electric vehicle, you don't want to go back. They're so quiet, very easy to use, very easy to drive. So we're trying to build up that momentum and a lot of ambassadors within the city. So rather than the council saying, you know, electric vans are great, we've got over 300 across our fleet, we're actually trying to get organisations to say that message because they've had that experience and enjoyed it. We've done the same with electric bikes. So again, we have a trial scheme so people can trial an electric bike for a couple of weeks free of charge. We're such a hilly place, it's a good alternative to a car where people might not be so comfortable with bikes. So again, encouraging that through your workplaces, through your staff, making people aware is also helpful. With the White Rose Forest, we're looking to double our canopy from 17% to 33% by 2050. And again, we're looking for people to work with us either through sponsorship, through corporate volunteering, by donating a piece of land, to try and help make the city a much greener place. There's opportunities again for businesses to get involved in that. And then there's more kind of citywide initiatives around bike-friendly businesses, and also the LEP Active Travel Plan network. So there's ways to kind of get some support in terms of how you can change your sustainable travel plans. So another kind of key part is, as I said at the beginning, no organisation can do this on their own. So actually, when you are an employer, there's an opportunity about how you interact with your employees on the subject, how you get them to think about their own lifestyle and what they're doing. And so part of that kind of World Wildlife Day that I mentioned earlier and the removal of an owl is actually part of an international campaign from Kirstys In. And Kirstys In is a really interesting organisation with massive international support. So Leeds was one of the first cities to join up in the UK. But what's interesting about it is that they are trying to reach out to people who wouldn't normally engage on this agenda. So, for example, they got a week-long spread in the Sun newspaper. They are tied into the football clubs, getting into competitions with the different Premier Leagues, and they're just trying to get every person in the country or internationally understanding climate change and talking about it. So we're really trying to encourage businesses to actually become part of that Kirstys In campaign. They do a lot of the work for you, they provide you with messages, and then you just put your twist on it, really. So it's a really good way to kind of support that comms side. We also have our own Leeds by Example website, which is a more local campaign, very aligned with Kirstys In, so the two work well together. And so again, you know, encourage kind of businesses to share that with their own staff so they're aware it exists. Have a look, feed back to us, give us suggestions for what we can do to improve it, because it's meant to be a kind of interactive process. We have a newsletter that goes out monthly, and we have over 5,000 subscribers. It probably goes up about 300 or 400 every month. But it's not a council newsletter, it's a city newsletter. So if there's anything that businesses want to promote, positive stories about what they're doing to encourage other businesses to do something, we're always really keen to feature case studies about what people are doing, or if there's a call for action, you know, if you've got something you want to give out for reuse purposes, or you know, you're looking for a certain skill set or anything like that, linked to that sustainability agenda, we're really keen to promote it and to help organisations come together. So again, I'd really encourage you to join up to that and have a look, and to get in touch if you'd like your organisation to be featured. We also have a really active Twitter account, and you know, I'm always happy for me or somebody in my team to talk to businesses and see how we can work more closely together or how we can engage. So please, following this, you know, happy to answer questions and take comments, but also happy for you to follow up with me afterwards, or you know, to follow our Twitter account, follow the newsletter, or to provide feedback to us. So thank you very much, and I'll stop there. I just need to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Polly. Some really interesting insights there and some good tips for everybody. I'm going to pass to the floor to see if there's any questions. Yeah, Bryony, I can see you.
Hello, thanks, Polly. That was really interesting. Thanks. Lots more creative stuff going on than I was aware of, so that's cool. I had a question in terms of the plan. How's it going to balance out now that the airport's going to be extended?
Yeah. Yes. So that's still going through planning at the moment. So I'm in a bit of a difficult position to comment on that because that decision isn't actually fully taken at the minute. So I suppose in terms of our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, it's not included in that 2030 target. And ultimately, the council's position has been and will always be there needs to be a national strategy on aviation, because you run the risk of, with the airport in Leeds, you don't expand and actually you don't reduce flights, people move to Manchester. And there's always been a gap in the way that that's accounted for. There's not proper accounting for aviation emissions, which isn't right. And we've said that for probably about the last 4 or 5 years. So yeah, that's probably all I can say on that at the moment.
That's a good question. Good question. Thank you. Sarah?
Hi, thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. I kind of want to know what research has been done, if any, on the main barriers of adoption for a lot of businesses, maybe like in the SME market or the particular sectors that are better at adopting more sustainable practices than others. And across the city, is there a general kind of barrier that stops us progressing? Because obviously we've got amazing kind of schemes going on, like demonstrated. I just wondered if there's any sort of research on that.
I'm not aware of, I'm sure there probably is specific research, I'm not aware of it, but I think, you know, a lot of the challenges tend to be funding. So a lot of the easy measures, so what the Climate Commission do is they look at measures that are easy to do and affordable. So the classic example is always LED lighting. You know, if you put LED lighting in within about 4 years, you will have paid back. So actually as a business, it makes sound investment sense. However, when you start to look at, you know, even something like the district heating, it's a really long-term strategic investment. And for a lot of businesses, that's quite a challenge. They're making investment decisions on much shorter timescales. And we're even looking at that with things like, for example, heat pumps in housing at the moment. You know, you can replace a gas boiler probably for a couple of £1,000 at the minute, but if you were to then put an air source heat pump in, the cost would be significantly higher. You might be looking at £8,000 to £10,000 per property. So I think it's looking at how we start to mainstream some of those things, start to bring the cost down, and look at how we kind of get that gap narrowed. So I think we have a lot of the technical solutions. We don't always have the policies in place to encourage them to be taken up, and also we don't always have the funding that's available. Yeah, and Nadia's just flagged up, which is, thank you, Nadia. I didn't want to drop you in it because I know you're relatively new to this post, but there's a funded programme available for SMEs in West Yorkshire to reduce their energy usage. So Nadia's put that in the chat in
That's
terms
useful.
of, yeah, so that's a really practical scheme.
Thank you for the link to that, Polly. Nick Wayne, you were next.
Yes, hi. Interestingly, when Boris came to power, one of the first things he said was that Leeds is the largest city in Europe without a rapid transport system, and that will be put right immediately, if not sooner. What's happening with our rapid transport system?
So that forms part of the transport consultation that's taking place at the moment. So if I haven't got the link to hand, but I can send the link through to Chris to send out to this group, if that would be helpful. And that is part of the consultation. So it's happening at a West Yorkshire level rather than at a Leeds level. But there is a plan in place around rapid transport.
That's good to hear. Michelle Marks? You're on mute.
Hi, I think you're aware my chat's not working, so Polly, I want to tell you about an event that's happening in a couple of weeks' time, which is about a few carbon literacy trainers who are launching something called Speak Carbon, which is about raising awareness. I would put it in the chat, but as I say, I can't find a chat button on this screen at all. So could you share your email address with me, please? And anyone who's interested, yeah.
We can sort that out for you afterwards, Michelle. That's fine.
Thank you.
Sarah, is that your legacy hand, or have you got another question? I think it might be a legacy hand. Any other questions for Polly? Can I just ask Polly, how has COVID impacted on the plan, progress on the plan? Because I'm thinking in some ways people haven't been using as many cars and buses, so it's reduced, but in other ways we're all sort of pumping away and heating our houses more, and you know, is it too early to monitor that?
No, so I think the initial thoughts are that carbon emissions have probably dropped about 10 to 12% in the city over the last year. And it's had some really sort of strange effects in a way, because our district heating network has been delivered more quickly, because we've been able to access the roads and we've been able to kind of do the infrastructure work that we'd have had to have done very slowly and cautiously normally, but because of the drop off in traffic, we've been able to do that in a more aggressive way. And that's been the same with some of the transport schemes. On the other hand, we haven't been able to go into individuals' properties and kind of connect them to the district heating or do the retrofit work that we might have been doing to housing. So it's had the kind of effect of speeding up things, slowing things down. As a council, it's had a really big impact in terms of there's something we call grey fleet, which is when people do mileage in their own cars rather than the fleet that's owned by the council. And actually we do a really high number of miles, as a lot of organisations do, with things like social workers travelling around between homes, and that has reduced probably by about 50% for the council. Some of that will restart back up, because some of it has been because we've had to compromise service in terms of what we deliver. However, we have found some really new ways of working that will carry on. So for example, you know, we always go out and do an annual housing survey. Things like that won't happen now. It will be more of a risk-based approach. You know, things like drones have been brought in to do some of the surveying work. So I think it's really pushed us on as an organisation to think about digital, think about kind of being more innovative, and kind of encourage other organisations to not necessarily revert back in every way, and to take the best bits out of what's happened over the last year.
Thank you. And in terms of businesses across Leeds, how much awareness do you think there is in climate emergency? I mean, I think that we've got quite a green crowd here today. We've got lots of people representing green within their organisations. But you know, generally, would you say that there's a huge learning curve for businesses, or do you feel it's just a few tweaks and we're almost there? I mean, how on track are we?
I think there's a real mix, in all honesty. So, you know, if you work, like, for example, some of the big international technical consultancies are leading the way. You know, some of the businesses where, you know, it's at the heart of what they do are kind of at the forefront, and where they see the customer perception. So, you know, things like supermarkets or Amazon with their kind of move towards electric fleet, because they know the public are aware and pushing it. So I think, you know, you'll get those organisations who see the value for them for doing it. But there's other organisations that I think, you know, are struggling to get by, especially at the moment. And it's not their number one priority, and probably the understanding isn't there as much as it should be. So I think, as with the public, I think it's very similar with businesses, as there's the whole range. And it's how we reach out to the businesses, because the minute you put something's a climate event, some people won't come because they're not interested. So it's how you mainstream it is always a real challenge for us. And we're always open to suggestions, I think, if people have got ideas on how to deal with that.
Brilliant. Well, and thank you for sharing all the links. We will share your presentation, if that's all right, to everybody, so you can have a look at the data, but also link to the slides to be part of the campaigns and to be case studies and so on. So hopefully there'll be some good positive connections from this, and you can ask Polly questions later on. So we're going to just move to the second section of this session today with Kirsty Dodd, who's going to talk to us about the refilling station. So over to you, Kirsty.
Hi everyone, I hope everyone's all right. This is my first time that I've ever done something like this, so I haven't prepared a presentation. I thought I'd just talk about what my business is and how I do what I do and why I do it. So I hope that's all right with everybody. So, about 2 years ago, I started my own business in Chapelhallerton, and it's called the Refilling Station. And essentially, I'm an eco-friendly grocery shop, and I sell lots of things, mainly food. About 60% of my my stock is food related, but it's a bit different to what you'd find in a supermarket. Lots of you might have been into a shop similar to mine. There are more and more of them around the country now, but I sell things like loose oats, pasta, and all whole foods really, that you can just bring your own container in and fill it up. You don't have to buy a packet, you can buy what you want. I've got special scales that allow you to bring your own bags, bottles and that kind of thing, so you can just refill it with what you want and how much you want in it. And I do that because I always thought I was really good at recycling, but I got really conscious of the amount of recycling that I was actually doing and deciding that I didn't think it was enough. I was also pretty unhappy in my job, and when the opportunity came for me to take redundancy, I did, and I used that money to set up my business as it is now. And I absolutely love what I do. It's really hard, especially like everyone else with COVID currently, but I do care very passionately about it, and I do. Obviously, it's my business, and I do try and get involved as much as I can with what's going on around, not just in my business. So I do, to reduce, essentially it's about reducing plastic, but there's more to it than that. It's not just enough just to not sell things in plastic or that kind of thing. But I run a lot of circular supply, which is things like a lot of my cleaning products come to me in big 20-litre drums that then get sent back to the supplier to be refilled and then brought back again. So I'm not generating any new plastic, and customers tend to just bring in whatever they want. I have labels that I can label up any bottle, container, and then that customer can take it away knowing that they've not contributed to another bottle. Same with the foods, literally anything suitable can be filled. Bags, boxes, anything really that's suitable for food can be refilled. And I work really closely with who my suppliers are. So another thing Polly talks about a lot was carbon. I choose local suppliers where I can. Some of my suppliers are in Chapelhallerton, where my shop's based. Some of them are in and around Leeds, some of them in Yorkshire, but it's all designed to kind of reduce that carbon from having lots of vehicles all around Yorkshire to maybe one larger vehicle that brings the majority of my stock to me. And again, when things go back to the suppliers, they're cleaning out something that's already there, and often that product's not just me that uses it, it's other businesses that are similar to mine, because a lot of the suppliers that we use on a circular refill supply us and other businesses that are very similar, and there are lots and lots, as I've said, more around the country now. Our staff as well, in terms of carbon, we employ practically all of our staff are local to our shop and could all walk to work. I'm 10-minute walk away from my Chapelhallerton shop, which is amazing. I never had that before. I used to have to drive, so I'm really grateful that I'm local to where I work most of the time. I try my best to keep on top of the local environmental issues by just networking with other people in this kind of thing, or on Facebook, or just by reading things in the news. I try and learn as much as I can. I'm not perfect. I'm learning. I'm a new business, so I've got a lot of different hats on: payroll, tax, VAT, all that kind of thing. And I'm not perfect, but I try wherever I can to do the right thing and to learn all the time and not pretend that I know everything. I don't. What else do I need to say? In terms of my business, also in the area where I live, we've got elements of green space that I'm working with. I don't know if everyone's heard of Chapelhallerton Spaces. They're a local group, and I've been working with them on tree planting just outside where I live. We've also got a pond. So it's not just about my business, it's about my lifestyle as a whole. I try and always think of what would be the best thing to do And that also involves not buying new things where I can. I generally buy things that are second-hand or pre-loved, if you prefer that term. Even in business, I try that where I can as well. So I might look to buy a second-hand set of shelves rather than a new one. I might get a local carpenter to build something for me instead. I don't really do online stuff very well. So I don't do deliveries, and that's partly because I don't want to contribute to another set of deliveries going out and about. I prefer people to come to the shop. I think people like to come and talk about their experiences with us, and we learn a lot from what other people do, not just from what we think is the right thing to do. And Michelle, I've seen Michelle on this group, she's one of my customers, and it's really nice to kind of get that input from other people who've got similar values and concerns that we have as well. So I guess since COVID, what I've noticed more is that increased use of single-use items like gloves, masks, wipes, all that kind of thing. So it kind of really concerns me that now I worry that because of COVID, environmental issues have taken a back seat in some ways, things like single-use products. So where I can, we were selling reusable face masks before anyone else had them, that kind of thing, just to try and stop that throwaway culture. And I think lots of people do the right thing, but it's easy to kind of think that it doesn't matter anymore because something's more important. And we've also got this awful bit of plexiglass now around the till area that I just detest. It's just something I just don't want to be around forever. And we're very much in the shop, we've got that, but then we've also got the door open all the time to, for COVID safe. So there's a constant airflow, which also means that, first of all, staff are freezing, but secondly, we've got warm air just going out of the shop constantly. So our heating is on to keep the staff warm, but at the same time, for COVID safe, we have to have a constant fresh airflow coming in and out, which is tough. Polly mentioned as well the installing the lighting. So we've changed all of our light bulbs quite early on to more energy efficient ones. I think that's a really good way to just make a small change. And all those small changes really contribute overall. If every business just does a few things, then it really does add up. You may have to adapt a few things or not have the best looking, but just to stop that kind of consumerism and anything like that, so adds up to an amazing thing if everyone does it. I can see loads of questions coming up, but I literally can't concentrate on what's coming.
That's fine, Kirsty. That might be a good time to just take a break and see if there are any questions. But thank you so much. What an inspiration. It sounds like you're creating a bit of a movement in Chapel Allerton, not just a business. And just so inspiring to see how super hyper aware you are of in your personal life, for your business, the contradictions of warming with a door open. And I'm sure we're all going to have really creative ways to reuse all the Perspex screens that we created. Maybe there'll be a big sculpture or something. But really inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that as your startup story. Are there any questions for Kirsty? Or any comments, any feedback?
There's a few in the chat. I don't know whether...
Nick is saying that if you sell reusable face masks that don't steam up his glasses, he'd be there like a shot.
No.
Sarah made a good point around Sarah Hawthorne from Infusion Comms. So from a comms PR point of view, that lots of tenders are asking about sustainability, and businesses will be questioned about what they're doing. So if people aren't already doing something. Just lots of positive comments here. Nick, have you got a question?
Yeah, it's more of a comment, really. I do a lot of work with Seagulls, who do the recycled, reusable paint. And they had a small refill shop, but it's very much ancillary to their main business. But we've been talking to them about having a delivery service for the paint. And they're using a guy with an electric bike to actually go around and do delivery.
Yeah. Is this about asking if I would do it?
Yeah, I mean, the electric bike seems to tick all the boxes.
I think I agree in some ways. I know who it is who's doing the delivery, because actually Ian also used to run a shop very similar to mine.
That's right. Yeah.
Who does it, and he's going to be starting a business called Leeds Refills, but for now he's concentrating on the bike delivery. He's offered that service to me actually. I think the difficulty is it's scaling it up, and there's a limit to how much you can carry on a bike. And also we found is we just don't get that many orders for delivery. I think people prefer to come in and talk to a person, and I thought around COVID that would be much quieter, you know, people not wanting to come out, but actually the opposite was true in Chapel-Allerton. And we found, partly because we were supplying things that supermarkets just couldn't get. We never ran out of stock of things like flour because we're just small and a bit off the radar. But then once people found that we had flour, it was crazy. But just kind of getting, we just don't seem to get much of a desire for deliveries. So I've just not really pushed it anymore. It kind of, we probably get about 1-2 a month. It's not really a thing. Click and collect we do. But again, that's a little bit of a tricky one because we can't put it in people's containers. It has to be put in bags. And we do a service where we do have some pre-loved bottles that we can, because it's not putting food in, we'll put liquids in, like laundry liquid and things like that we get dropped off. And we can supply it like that. But click and collect's a bit of a difficult one because that's not really aligned with what I'm trying to do. Would still be generating lots of paper bags. And actually, in some ways, paper's not that eco-friendly either. There's a lot of, you know, you cut down a tree, the tree's sucked in a load of carbon dioxide, and where does that go when you cut the tree down? And it's still quite resource heavy, so we'd obviously prefer people to come and bring their own containers in.
Well, I think you'll have a lot of customers from us in the next few weeks. It's an interesting point about how COVID, people's concerns around hygiene and, you know, using single-use wipes and gloves has maybe pushed their thoughts on sustainability to one side. Do you think that's true? I don't know if that's a question for you as well, Polly.
I think for us, I think I'm that type of business that if people want to shop with a shop like mine because that's what they want to do, I generally don't get people in that I know of anyway that wouldn't. I'm not saying they would never do the wrong thing, but I think there's just the mindset's there that they would always use the reusable option. And we've got refillable hand sanitizer, so nobody needs to buy a new bottle of that. We can refill whatever they've got really. But I've come across it on Facebook chats and things like that when I've just been scouring, you know, just whatever's going on. And there's a lot of people kind of, not a lot, but a few people kind of saying, you know, because of COVID, environmental issues are a backseat now, which I hope isn't true. I don't think it's.
No. Great. Any other questions for Kirsty directly? Or for Polly? Is Andrew Zebos still in the room from Revive Leeds? I saw he came in earlier. Andrew, are you there? I heard on the grapevine that Revive Leeds, they were absolutely full with all the people having clear outs during lockdown. Oh, he's got no mic. But well done for all your work at Revive Leeds, Andrew, because I know lots of people who are using you and all through last year. If there's no questions from everyone here, can I ask you, Polly, around, can you just explain a bit more about the electric bike trials, how that works?
Yeah, sure. So believe it or not, it's had international recognition. You wouldn't believe that something like that. We've been featured on the news in the US. We've had students from the US writing for their projects and things because it's just been picked up. So it's funny sometimes what captures the imagination, but literally I think within a week of it going live, we had enough people registered to keep us busy for about 6 months, which I think is interesting. Lockdown had a bit of an impact on it because we could only lend to people that were commuting, and obviously a lot of people weren't commuting because of obviously the stay-at-home order. So we changed our focus to sort of teachers and key workers. So we've managed to keep it going. So, I mean, basically you can contact us and you can use that email address, the climate emergency one, and they'll put you in touch with the right team. and you just put your name down on the waiting list, and we'll get you an electric bike to use for 2 weeks. And you know, they can, it's obviously all COVID secure in the sense of the way it's handed over and the way the bike's cleaned down in between times. And then we're just using it to get case studies and make more of a sort of song and dance about what people are doing. And because we always think it's better for others to say what's happened rather than the council, you know, to stand there and to sort of preach about things. You want real life case studies, so we're trying to enable people to have those real life experiences. Right. But yeah, no, it's been really useful. I think they've done about 3,000 miles so far.
Really? Wow, I'm definitely interested. I'm going to try one out.
We'll get you on a video.
Oh God. And any other questions? Christopher, have we got any pre-proposed questions from delegates?
Yeah, we had a question from Kim Burmiston. She works a lot with schools, and I know, Polly, that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that is really important, and we know it's important. That was something that Kim echoed, that as she's working with primary and secondary school students, she's really conscious that they have a real drive for seeing sustainability. Are there any particular events or projects or groups that youths could get involved with, perhaps just to encourage that attitude?
Yeah, so at a kind of more basic level, on the Leeds, for example, website, there's a page that's specifically targeted at youth, and that was actually developed by the children of Leeds. So we had a primary school forum and a secondary school forum, and they contributed to what they thought the top tips should be, and we've worked on that in conjunction with them. So that's now been launched. And then, you know, there's the youth council that happens all the time, and the youth part and local sort of Leeds Youth Council that people can join in, and their issue for the last year has been the climate, which they vote on and choose to work on. And so we just, I suppose, encourage schools to do a lot on their own and to use the materials that are put forward, rather than, you know, and there will always be like events for primary schools and events for secondary schools, but there's not sort of a specific group. It's something I think that does happen more through schools, and we also support people like the Scouts and the Guides to build it into what they're doing.
Amazing.
Fantastic. We just had one more question, sorry, as well. It came through on social media, sorry, from a sustainability group. They were wanting to know, obviously you'd mentioned about tree planting and biodiversity and the success there. Obviously it's quite a complex process, tree planting, and not always successful in certain areas. How do you kind of plan to sort of mitigate any of the challenges that come along with that process?
So when you talk about challenges, I suspect you sort of referring, like, you know, quite often we'll get requests to cut down trees because it's dropping petals or leaves on somebody's car, or there is an element of education that needs to go in hand. I think if you were to talk to the ward councillors, some of the biggest complaints that you know, the kind of most common complaints that come in are linked to trees, interestingly, and not in the way that we want it to be linked to trees. So there is, you know, part of the city that we need to do some work about actually what are the benefits of trees, but the kind of mapping how we do trees, that we've got sort of policies for how it's done to make sure that it's done in a sustainable way, that, you know, you don't end up with a monoculture of trees and then when a disease hits, the whole lot go. You know, there's rules, and there's a guy called Glenn who will tell you it's 3 of these and 2 of that and 1 of this, and then it all works together. So there's quite detailed policies about how that happens. We're also re-looking at things like our tree replacement policy. So when trees do have to come down, either because, you know, they're damaged or diseased or whatever it is, that the tree replacement policy is much tighter, because at the moment it's 1 to 3, and that doesn't reflect the carbon benefit of that tree that comes down. So we've been working with the university to get a much more accurate picture of, you know, what does a fully established tree achieve, and actually what should that tree replacement policy look like, and that will form part of our local planning documents this year.
Thank you. Great. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, Polly, for the city and planning, and thank you for your presentation, and thank you too to Kirsty for your insight and sharing your case study with us all. It's inspired me, so I hope hopefully it's inspired others. We'll follow up with links to the delegates here today. But kind of a virtual round of applause for Polly and Kirsty for sharing. Lots of love in the room here for you. Lots of people on board with this really important cause. So thanks so much for your time today, and thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks very much for having me.
Adios. Thank you. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Christopher, for organising it all.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye everyone.
Thanks. Bye.